Oh dear.
Oh dear?
Yeah. I think you identified correctly that this is going to be the last ever episode of the Carmudgeon Show.
Oh? Do
You
tell.
said it.
There were some controversial hot takes, I think, in this episode of the Carmudgeon Show.
It's not controversial. It's just fact.
Okay. There are some takes, and they have a temperature.
They are the thermodynamically reactive. Yeah. We put some hot gasoline and flames inside a catalytic converter in a thermal reactor and made things explode. What we're talking about is why the Malaise Era was a really good thing. Which is words no one's ever said before.
By extension, the role of government regulations in creating the texture of the cars that we all interact with, some of which we like, others of which we do not care for at all.
All seen through the lens of the beautiful Bruno Sacco era. No, I'm kidding. Ignore the 129.
He's somewhat kidding. Only somewhat kidding.
I mean, it just happens to be the episode of the Carmudgeon Show after the Revelations episode on the 129, so we have an R129 in the background, and we have to wrap that around because otherwise people are going to be like, why is there a 129 in the background?
I don't. Most people are listening and not watching anyway, so they won't know what is in the background. We could tell them there is a Bugatti Veyron.
No, that's a Chiron. Oh no, that's a Tourbillon. We, ladies and gentlemen, we have an exclusive today here on the Carmudgeon Show. We have a Bugatti Tourbillon here in the studio. It's revving to 12,000 RPM the entire time.
Okay, well, I'm going to clap now, and then you guys will.
Got a round of applause for my bullshit.
Jingle.
Do you know what enthusiasts care about, Derek?
Yeah.
What?
I am one.
Oh, what do you care about? We have a script right here, and it says
driving when I want to drive.
But it says enthusiasts care about details, and the fact that you're fighting to get the bobbleheads, battery tender bobbleheads,
plastic turtleneck.
It's a scarf. It's aimed backwards because he hit the gas really hard, and
he's at speed. Just don't.
Yes,
Isadora Duncan.
Battery Tender is trusted. By the way, this episode of Carmudgeon Show is sponsored by Battery Tender, if you hadn't figured that out. Mm-hmm. And Battery Tender is trusted for cars, motorcycles, and boats.
Mm-hmm. Because it ensures that you can use your car when you want to.
Yes.
Because a dead battery spoils all the fun.
And Battery Tender does make jump starters, battery chargers, and the charge and start. I did a little bit of a Michigan accent there.
Of course.
Charge and start, which is a single device that is both a battery maintainer and a jump starter.
So if you would like to get 20% off, be sure and use the Hagerty 20 code. Again, Hagerty 20 at batterytender.com.
You got it. Okay. Do you know what else enthusiasts care about?
All of the barriers associated with using and enjoying their cars.
Oh, I was talking about R129s.
Oh.
There is to no one's surprise, a Sako era Mercedes behind us.
Uh-huh.
That very car was one of 3 SLs that was in last week's Revelations video.
And why did you need 3, pray tell?
Well, I could have had more than that. I wanted a 6-cylinder, a V8, and a V12. And obviously I was not about to even look at a V8, a V6. That wasn't going to happen. So
they didn't sell the V6 in the United States also, which helps.
Yeah, it was a fun Revelations to do. And I sort of glossed over a lot of the powertrains that weren't available in the US, like the M103, which is the 12-valve straight 6. Which is
if you think this car is slow.
I don't think that car is slow. I think that car accelerates slowly.
Yes.
It's actually not slow. It just feels it.
Yeah.
So that is a 300 SL-24, as it would have been badged if it were a Euro market car. So the 24-valve, 7,000 RPM, straight 6 with a dogleg 5-speed manual. It's so good. It's so good. So I did the back road drive on the 3 cars, back to back to back. Mm-hmm. So it was your 500 SL in Beryl, which is a really great color. That's the 4-cam 5-liter V8. And then there we have our buddy's 600 SL in
Magma
red? Flaming red. It's just very, very red.
It's so red that it's on fire.
And that is also the 4-valve V12. So driving them back to back was really interesting because it was my previous belief that the 500 would be my favorite. And it was, but I wouldn't buy it because it's an automatic and I don't particularly care for that automatic. So I would buy that 300 SL 24 5-speed dogleg again, which is the only 129 I've ever owned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the 600?
Not a fan.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the inline six. So the 600 is, by the way, 2 M104 3-liter straight six. Sorry, did I say the 600? The V12 is 2 of the straight sixes, confirmed in my research that it's actually one of the heads is identical or nearly identical. The other one is a mirror image, obviously. The V12 doesn't sound nearly as good as the 6 does.
Mm.
And all the extra firepower is...
Is that exhaust system design or...
I don't know. The same thing happened with the 850 CSI. I mean, the BMW, the E31, that BMW M70 V12 doesn't sound as good as either of the 2 M20s that are connected to, I don't know, some exhaust routing thing. But the other thing that I did, and I don't have the numbers here. I should pull it up. I weighed all 3 cars. And this is very interesting.
So the quoted weights, this is from memory from Mercedes-Benz, but I think the quoted weight on the 600 is 4450 and the quoted weight on the 500 is 4150.
Which means that the V12 weighs 300 pounds more, 300 and something pounds more.
Yeah. And
almost
the
400.
300 is under 4,000 pounds. I want to say it's like 3,900 or something like that. So, according to Mercedes-Benz's published numbers, all from the same brochure.
Something seriously fucked up. When I look at the original road tests of the cars, the weights were a little bit higher than what the factory said, I think, if I remember correctly. But the V12 was a porker. I want to say they were 4,400 pounds or something.
Yeah, so I said 4,450.
The red SL that we had, which is a very late SL 600, with the panoramic hardtop on it.
Roof installed.
Roof installed. I removed it also to get weight. Even with the panoramic hardtop was 4,228 pounds. And the panoramic hardtop weighs 93 pounds. So that 600 SL, which we all moo at, is only 4,140. And by the way, the 500 SL, so these are all full tanks of gas, no hardtops on them. The 500 SL's 3,920.
Oh, a veritable Lotus.
Well, I mean, yeah. So that is 218 pounds. There's 220 when we round it up. But the crazy part is the 300 SL manual versus the 500 SL automatic. So you're going from a straight 6 to a V8, from a 5-speed manual to a 5-speed automatic. The difference is 41 pounds.
I wonder what the automatic 300 SL weighs.
I mean, I don't understand this.
The M104 is sort of a famously heavy engine.
It must be, because to have 40 pounds to get an automatic and a V8, that doesn't make sense. That means the straight 6 has to weigh more than the V8 does. Crazy. But anyway, that car behind us
is the V8 aluminum throughout. Yeah. And the straight 6 is a cast iron block. No,
they're aluminum. It's all aluminum. I don't understand this. Anyway, 3880 for that car, 3920 for your 500 SL, and 4140 for the 600.
Maybe the cars have been sublimating over time because they're old now, so they've gotten lighter as time.
Off-gassing rust.
Yes, exactly. Cars are getting...
The crazy thing to me is that, everyone says you really
Did you leave all my shit in the trunk?
No, everything got taken out. You had a lot of stuff in there.
There's like a car cover and
that weighs a pound. You really don't actually feel the difference in weight between the cars. Of them all, the 600 actually felt the best on the twisty road because it's not active body control. It's ADS.
Adaptive damping.
Which is system. A fully active suspension, right? Just slow, but it does do stuff. That was my favorite to hustle. And this is our friend's car, and I think he's got aftermarket shocks on it that are a little bit too soft. So you definitely could tell, like my 300 SL was not that floppy and loose, but that car is an absolute unmitigated riot on the back roads, and the 500 is just so fast. And the 600, the V12 only is really fast at high speeds. Is it only much faster than this?
Than the V8.
Yeah, than the V8. Than the V8. It doesn't actually, the V12 feels torqueless down low and the V8 doesn't, which is strange.
Yeah, the V8 proved to be a very enjoyable rally car. I had a great time.
Yeah, that is. I think the 500 SL is the best of all of them. But the 300 stick shift is the most fun to hustle.
Sure.
Just because, it's a manual. But yeah, no, it was an interesting episode. I think I talked about this. We did on the episode that we filmed live on location in Monterey Car Week, that Sako didn't actually design these cars.
Correct.
So I think we've mostly covered what we need to cover on 129s, especially considering we've spoken at great length of Sako era cars.
And R129s. In the past.
Definitely, I titled that episode "The World's Most Perfect Collectible," and I stand by that. Hopefully, the comments don't crucify me too much.
You always use that terminology when talking about Sako cars.
I use that for the world's most perfect sedan.
Yes.
Yeah, I did that again. I actually say in the episodes, as journalists, we're cautioned against using the word perfect, but everyone always did with these cars, and they were nearly perfect.
Yeah. I'm obviously a fan and a serial consumer. These cars.
It was also really cool to see the three cars together, because we had this is an early car, then the 600 was a late car, and then yours is an early car with a later paint scheme, so it doesn't have the contrasting lowers, and it has 8-hole wheels instead of those gully decals
and clear corners, which were added in '95.
Oh, your cars originally those are correct for your car?
Yes, because it's a '95, but in '94 they have amber and they were two tones.
All of us who were here all preferred the look of this car. These wheels fit the car best.
I like the 8 holes personally, but I
like the wheels a lot. But I think that this color scheme on this car with the contrasting lower and the wheels, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah. A quantum leap ahead against the R107.
It was also 200 years newer, because the R107 was in production for 200 years.
Yeah, there should have been 1 to 2 intermediate generations between the 107 and 129, and there just wasn't.
It just wasn't.
And the reason for that...
goddamn government regulations.
Exactly.
Strangely.
Yeah.
Which leads us to...
specifically in the United States.
Yeah, actually, it was 100% U.S. related. I made a statement as we were deciding what this episode topic was going to be, and Derek raised an eyebrow in disbelief. And I thought I was going to get punched, because I said we should do an episode where we just disagree on something. And it was that the Malaise era was actually good for us.
That's not exactly what you said.
What'd I say? We benefited from the Malaise era?
I don't know. I don't remember exactly. But you implied that the Malaise era was good.
Yeah,
which
it was. It was a terrible time to be a car enthusiast, but
yes, it was a result. It was a painful time of transition.
Yes. So let's define the Malaise era.
Yes, let us do that.
You go ahead. I'm just kidding.
I don't know. Shall we say 1973 to 72, 73 to 1980.
5, 6.
Yeah, sure.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Okay. So that the mid 70s to mid 80s.
But the early side of the mid 70s, I think it's.
Well, okay. So cars when we were talking about emissions and fuel economy, really 74, 75, 76 is when it got bad.
That's when it got bad. 68 was the first year where they started having to make concessions, but they didn't truly become really catastrophic until 74 or so.
And then you also had lighting regulations changed, bumper regulations changed.
Correct.
And so you had these
the first
bumpers.
regulations for both safety and emissions. That's not entirely true, because you had sealed beam headlights that were mandated in the 1940s, I think. But in large part, the substantive changes to the car started arriving in 68, model year 68. Mandatory headrests, side reflectors, sort of padded interior components. And you see this certainly in a lot of European cars. You'll see it in model year 68 Porsches and Jaguar E-Types and Mercedes Pagodas. There's a lot of stuff that starts changing for the 68 model year. And I'm sure this is true of American cars too, but I know nothing about them, so I can't specifically comment. But yeah.
And then 72, when was the big bumper? 72? 74?
73 is when you would start to see the rubber bumper overriders arriving on stuff like 911s and E-Types. and 74, I think, was the full 5 mile an hour impact requirement, which was that you had to survive a 5 mile per hour impact without substantive damage to the structure of the car.
And that is, for the record, not a safety concern. That's a consumer product concern, really. So the bumpers are not a safety device. They're there so that you can bump into something and not damage your car. And so this was government regulation to force the car companies to make a consumer product that protected the consumer's wallet more than anything else, right? So you can have a little bit of a parking ding and not go have a multiple $1,000 repair adjusted for inflation. But yeah, the government started to get a bit heavy-handed, I guess, is late 60s, early 70s, and then really clamp down.
This is specifically in the United States, we should add also.
Yeah. And this was also a result of an international fuel crisis.
Correct.
Energy crisis, I guess, is the correct word. And so by the time you transition from like 1969 through 1979, if you look at the horsepower figures of cars, they just plummeted. And the cars also just started to run like shit also. Everyone was chasing smaller and more fuel efficient sized cars, which then resulted in the downsizing trend for the American industry, which was not done well initially.
Correct. You could tell that it was being imposed on them externally and not because they thought it was good.
Consumer demand wasn't necessarily there for the American stuff that was downsized, because they were just chopping wheelbase out of cars and still have these big long great long hoods and just very space inefficient vehicles that the consumers didn't want. And then the next crop of sort of front wheel drive cars that came in that were compact, but they were not exactly the best.
Can you provide us with an example of that?
Chevy Citation.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it wasn't a world-beating car. It was just an economy car that the GM had to shit out because this idea of corporate annual fuel economy or CAFE
average.
Corporate average fuel economy kicked in, and car companies had to hit this fleet average of fuel economy or they were penalized. And this has continued through today-ish, yesterday, a couple days. It just stopped.
Okay, so this is about the end of CAFE. CAFE, like you said, stands for corporate average fuel economy. That's for cars. Those trucks are exempted from that. But basically, it states that the entire blend, and is this done on a per capita basis in the sense that every car counts, or is it that your whole product portfolio?
No, it's every car sold counts. So it's the average.
For the entire
fleet of cars sold.
Fleet of cars. So if you sold 12 cars that got 6 miles per gallon, as long as you sold 1,100 cars that got 35 miles per gallon, you were okay.
Yeah. And CAFE is why this car exists in its form.
Many cars, in fact.
Yeah. Yes. So this was, just to wrap it around to Sako era Mercedes, very quickly, the CAFE requirements were passed in 1975 and must have taken the entire automotive industry by surprise because they all panicked. And Mercedes' response was throw a diesel in everything right away.
Except the SL.
Except the SL as a stopgap. Well, that's the 129 was supposed to have have a diesel, and I found a picture of one.
Yeah,
I was very, very happy about that. A test mule. But throw a diesel in everything just to get the CAFE numbers up temporarily as a stopgap measure, and then create a new family of smaller cars, and a new family of smaller, far more fuel efficient engines. And that was the 201, as we know, is the 190E or the baby Benz, and the 124, that E-Class. And the M102 family of 4-cylinders, which was in the 190. That project took all of Mercedes' resources, and therefore they had to shelve the development of the 129, which would have otherwise come out in 1981 for the 81 model year. Instead, it came out almost 10 years later.
And what was the penalty for a manufacturer that didn't meet the...
It's a per unit penalty, and I don't remember what it is.
Something inconvenient.
Well,
something to cause them to comply.
And Tesla, for example, their entire business model at this point, their entire profitability has been selling CAFE credits, because obviously no Tesla has ever burned fuel. And so they have credits that they can then sell to other automakers. And Stellantis, for example, would be in big trouble with all the Hemis and the big V8s and all these fuel inefficient vehicles, large fuel inefficient vehicles. And so they just buy Tesla's credits and then just sort of bake them into the price of the car. However, so really Café has very dramatically changed the shape of the cars that we drive. 15 years ago now, they revised the Café standards to be a function of footprint. So wheelbase times track, for example. And so the bigger and wider, the longer and wider your car is, the lower the standard you have to hit. If you're ever wondering why the BMW 3 Series got fucking enormous, it's because it now has a 112-inch wheelbase, which is not only the same size as a Toyota Land Cruiser, but is also as big as the old 7 Series was 25 years ago. And it's so that they could hit lower, they had lower targets to hit. So it's really changed the face of all the cars that we drive in this country. And the Trump administration has just basically removed those standards. So the standards are still in place, but the fines are gone. So there's now no penalty for any car company
not meeting
this
Café. And so we're talking about fuel economy. There have been obviously emissions requirements, and I think this is a particularly interesting topic, which we have probably discussed at length at various times. The fuel economy standard, so the Clean Air Act arrived in 1963, and then that was sort of a description of like what the government's responsibility would be, and then the standards, I think, really arrived with the first revision, which was in 1970, and that's where they say, X% reduction in emissions of various types, so that would be, NOx and SOx, so that's sulfur and nitrogen oxides. And this is the result of insufficient oxygen during combustion, if I remember correctly. And they also are managing particulate matter, which is like soot in the case of diesel, and lead, this is the origin of unleaded fuel. And what else is being controlled? Hydrocarbons. And there's probably
CO2.
That's later on, I think.
Okay.
There was probably one other thing. And so they basically come out with these regulations which are attenuated over time. And, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can manage this. Eventually, the catalytic converter emerges as like, oh, yes, this is very obviously the right solution to this problem. But that wasn't in place early on. And also it's predicated on having your fuel mixture controlled correctly, which was not possible at the time given the rudimentary technology, especially with carburetors. Although it can be done, and there are catalyzed carbureted cars for sure, but it's still not an ideal solution. And so this is the result of, smog laws, the smog present in developed areas. And, if you now sit in traffic behind an old car or an uncatalyzed car, you will notice that it's fragrant.
Stinks.
Yeah. And if you imagine like it's 1965 and no cars have emissions controls and they're all burning leaded fuel, it's like paints a very interesting picture. It gives you a headache.
I mean, every time I drive any of my uncatalyzed cars, and the Ferrari's the worst, I stink. I have to arrive at my destination and change.
Yeah.
And I have to keep a bag in the car of clothes that are sealed off because of everything around me stinks. And people kind of look at you in traffic, and I'm always thinking, we are in California, so everyone's a little bit, environmentalisty, but like it really fucking stinks.
Yeah.
And all uncatalyzed cars stink to some extent. That, the better the fuel economy, you can pull a cat off a modern car and they stink, but they stink far less. But I just always
I think they're burning a little bit more carefully, stoichiometrically. We've talked about this also, right? I love this graph that overlays the way in which NOx, SOx, and HC all vary based on as you get richer or leaner in mixture, and that there's this magical little window that if you could keep it in there, then you minimize somehow all three, or you develop the best compromise between the emissions, because one of them is sloping up while the other sloping down. Two of them.
And this is the one spot where not only they all get to the lowest point, but that they can be catalyzed away. So That's the only job that your fuel injection has, is to measure the amount of air that your engine is sucked in and apply the correct amount of fuel so that they're 14.7 times apart. That's literally its only job.
And that's what your oxygen sensor does. It monitors what's in your exhaust in order to tell you, or tell the computer, I guess, what's coming out, and so it can adjust in response to that. And so the addition of the Clean Air Act and the regulations of criteria pollutants, I guess is what they're called, also helps with a whole bunch of other stuff like acid rain, for example, or ozone. It's people who certainly, I think, who grew up around the time that I did, there was a big concern about the hole in the ozone layer and CFCs and all that stuff. And because of the regulations that were put in place as a result of the Clean Air Act, that sort of hole went away, and the problem that was sort of the catastrophic issue of its time was resolved through the power of regulation, a system of regulations, cap and trade in some situations, cap and trade meaning exactly what you were just talking about CAFE, where if you have some cap and you can achieve at a certain level, then you can sort of buy credits as a short-term, the intent is a short-term solution until you can come into compliance, and people who are overperforming get credit for that, and that creates a market, basically a market dynamic around controlling and ultimately reducing and the government controls the quantity of these things that exist, and so then it sort of has the desired effect of reducing the system's output of whatever the criterion pollutant is, whether it's CFCs or whatever. So acid rain, the problem is effectively solved. I never think about acid rain. The ozone hole was also solved. We talked about the leaded gasoline was another one where the power of the regulations was such that it was just phased out. And what we saw through the Malaise era is the struggles of engineers to figure out how to solve these problems.
Right.
And it's an interesting, kind of a bold approach, which was probably the response to a serious problem that people were really struggling with, which is, the air quality and just quality of life and the cost to the entire system of the economy. Say this costs trillions of dollars. The impacts of poor air quality cost trillions of dollars and thousands of lives a year. And so you say, like, this is going to be painful and it's going to end, the muscle car era, but it will presumably be worth it. And then by the time that the mid 80s roll along, the engineers have figured out, okay, here's a solution that allows us to have our cake and eat it too. And you get there within more or less 10 years, but there's a very painful 10-year process by which everyone's figure out, and consumers in the short term deal with the unpleasant consequences of that, like thermal reactors.
Right.
Which is basically an afterburner.
Right. Shit that just didn't work, that caused the cars to run like shit, or just...
Yeah, they met the numbers, but at what cost? They were high. The durability of the cars, the engines specifically, and the emission systems.
I was telling the story earlier today, actually. I had a carbureted 1986 Isuzu Pup. Now, 86 is very much the end of the Malaise era, although I don't think Isuzu was quite...
At the bleeding edge.
At the bleeding edge of that.
Especially not with a truck.
No. And because the trucks were exempt from most of the standards, still are in large part. But this was a carbureted engine with a catalytic converter and an oxygen sensor, so it had some feedback.
The car was an 86?
86.
18 or 1986?
1786. It was 1986, and
wow.
And so I went to go we have to do smog checks every 2 years, and it failed miserably. And so I thought, I had a problem. And I mentioned it in passing to a friend who was a mechanic. He said, I know, I worked at Isuzu when those cars were new and they never passed. I'm like, well, how'd you smog them? He said, well, there's these two lines on the carburetor, and it's vacuum lines. One is whatever. And you reverse them. The car will run like absolute garbage, but will pass. And that's how we got them all through. I mean, there was this level of fuckery going on. It was just that difficult to get these cars to pass.
Well, because... And the whole reason for this is a carburetor is cheaper than fuel injection, and if you are trying to make margin, then you make them be carbureted.
Cheaper, right? I mean, that car ran perfectly, unless it was actually emitting, and to sound shades of Dieselgate, right? Unless it was emitting multiple times what it was allowed to do, and the technology just wasn't there to allow car companies to make cars that ran well, made power, and also hit the numbers. So we have this whole era of cars that are shit, that we sort of all look down on. In California, we don't want to own them because we have to smog them every 2 years, which is increasingly difficult.
Yeah, and they're still carbureted, so that makes it all the more difficult and unpleasant. And this is the reason which we briefly, for one shining moment, tried to make Leno's Law be a thing, which has subsequently expired, died.
But I mean, I own a 1975 car that is smog exempt, so I don't have to smog it every 2 years. I would not buy a 76 version of that same car, period. It's not even remotely possible. In fact, I have receipts, which you gave to me with the car, because I bought it from you, this is the Ferrari, that when the car was 11 years old, I think it was, they spent 8 months trying to get it to pass smog. Mm-hmm. I mean, this was an 8-year-old car with 20,000, 30,000 miles on it, whatever. It was idiotic. I mean, it was a terrible time. And since then, obviously 1975 cars have been exempted, so I don't have to do it at all. But this was a real problem.
It's also an opportunity for our shitbox rally where we, everyone had to buy a $2,000 car at a rally, and there's an incredible window of extremely cheap late 70s cars because nobody wants to deal with getting them emissions checked here. And so they all are just basically free because it's so much pain to get one plated.
The sad part is this is going to be all of the Radwood era cars, because in California, they're now everything 96 and newer is just a plug-in. So as long as the computer doesn't have a check engine light on and says everything's okay, you're good to go. So the 76 through 95 cars are going to be the ones that we have to smog, and their values are going to be pushed way down, which is every car I own. So great. Fuck you.
I think if you have a well-maintained, happily sorted, unmodified car with EFI and a catalytic converter, you might have a sporting chance.
Oh, yeah. You'll have a sporting chance, but it's still a pain in the ass to do every 2 years.
It absolutely is. I mean, a friend of mine has something is clearly wrong, but my friend of mine has an 87 911 with EFI and a catalytic converter. When those cars are running well, they're extremely clean, and his is not. And, it's probably a sign that either something is wrong with it is a sign that something is wrong with it, whether that's related to peripherals and controls, or whether the engine is just worn out and, it uses some oil. So that may be a contributing factor, but if it's a happy sorted car, then it will be happy. It can pass as long as it has EFI, closed loop, fuel injection, and a catalytic converter. And
everything is perfect. I mean, I've had problems with the Cabriolet. Everything's running absolutely perfect, and NOx is just really high because it was a 10.8 to 1 compression car in the 1980s. Yeah. And there just weren't.
Well, that's CIS also.
That's CIS.
It's more rudimentary fuel injection.
It's all more rudimentary, but the problem isn't the NOx emissions on that car. The problem is that the standards have come down. It's stricter now than it ever was.
Correct.
And that's, we don't need to get into the California experience, but come on. You expect the cars to be cleaner now than they were 40 years ago and they were new. It's idiotic, but that's a different story.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad I said the word idiotic because, I don't want to come across like a government, a fan of big government and regulation. But in the whole point of this theory that the Malaise Era was good. The best example, I think I've given this example in the past. My friend Eric, who bought a house in LA in 2000.
Yes, you have.
And so very quickly, he lives on a street. He bought this house. Of course, he lives on a street. He bought a house and
he lives on a canal.
He lives on a canal. He's in Venice.
He's in Venice, yes.
Which is a suburb of LA. Anyway, no, he lives in Glendale
or Italy,
which is not Italy. It's little Armenia, which is next door to Italy. But no, he lives in Glendale and bought a house on the street, and I should be able to pull up a Google Maps thing of it. And at the end of the street, there is a mountain, just basically looks like a vertical cliff face. He didn't know. And this was in 2000. Mm-hmm. This was roundabout when the first Sulev cars came out. These are super ultra low emissions vehicles, and they're sort of, somebody realized that the air that was coming out of the exhaust pipe of Sulev cars was cleaner than the air that the engine was ingesting in places like Los Angeles. So this is really the beginning of the ramp up of getting cars really clean. And cars today are really clean. Yeah. And I think he had owned the house for 10 days or a month or some small amount of time, but non-zero amount of time, and called me and said, "Oh my God, there's a mountain at the end of my street." It was at the time maybe once a month or once every 6 months that he was able to see the mountain. The rest of the time, the sky was just white and smogged in, and it was just sky. He never can't see that unless there's a fire or something else now. And so we tend to think of the Malaise Era as really having changed emissions really from 1975 through 1990 or so. but the benefits were still really paying off in the 2000s and recently. And so he went from, and again, this is unimaginable to me, that he couldn't see the mountain that's a mile from his house, except for in rare exceptions, to now it's always he can see it. And of course, you got to remember the average car on the road in the United States is 12 and a half years old, 12.6 years old at this point. So it takes a long time for the fleet to filter through. But that's the difference in air quality just in the last 20 years, 25 years. And so we have the Malaise Era to thank for that. But we also have the Malaise Era to thank for not just R129. All of the cars that we have today that are fast as fuck. They start, they run, industry doesn't like to invest in things that are expensive, and emissions controls and fuel engine controls are very, very expensive and resource intensive to engineer. And I don't think we would be in a place where we had cars that started and ran with the perfection that we expect today if it wasn't for the Malaise Era and for those emission standards.
Yep. And, we now live in a place in time where we've seen that it's okay. And I think that it was difficult to imagine getting to that point. And of course, the GM engineers famously, this is the sort of Honda.
I knew you were going there.
They famously said it was impossible to deliver this level of performance, and the LS somehow is still around and is meeting all of these standards, the US ones anyway.
So that story, for those who don't hear, it was the General Motors V8. So GM approached the EPA.
The 350 cubic inch.
And Chrysler, they both approached, I think it was GM and Chrysler, but GM for sure, approached the government and said, it is absolutely impossible for us to meet your 1970, I think it was 2 or 5. It was in 72 that they did this, 75 emission standards, it won't happen. And Honda shipped over a Chevy, whatever it was.
Yeah, so Honda had previously developed CVVC, the compound CVCC, compound vortex combustion,
controlled combustion,
and were able to meet emission standards without significant,
even a catalytic converter.
Yeah, without a catalytic converter and significant pollution controls, just through controlling combustion. And GM said, well, that's something for a toy shitbox car. You can't do that with a real car.
Right. And so they actually made a V8 with CVCC heads on it, and it made more power. Honda did. And I think it made more power and got better fuel economy and
met the emission
standards without even a catalytic converter. Yes. And that was the ultimate, shut the fuck up to the car companies from Honda. Mm-hmm. And Hondas were sold for a number of years in the US without catalytic converters, post 75.
They didn't need them.
So was Volkswagen. The Rabbit did not need a catalytic converter, ran clean enough. But I digress.
But that was a painful transition.
Really painful. Look at the cars. I mean, if you want to be depressed, I've said this before. If you really want to be depressed, go read a car magazine from 1982. Yeah.
And go drive a car from this era too. Honestly, it's pretty. All of these large land yacht V8s, Corvettes. I mean, they're really just tragic. Mustang 2 was the result of this, right? They said, okay, we're going to think big, which means redesigning the whole car and not just making the existing one cleaner. And that was the result was Mustang 2. And there's this whole crop of,
right? They just put it
garbage,
on a Pinto
small cars that
although genius, because it's still Mustang 2 was a huge sales success because it was the correct car for the correct time, because people really did need fuel economy given the
but it wasn't objectively good.
It was terrible.
It was just it was something that still preserved some element of desirability while meeting the constraints of the time. But this different manufacturers from different places, I think, were able to manufacture cars that were less compromised through better engineering. Yep. And this was why this was yet another step in this sort of takeover of imports, which was really gaining traction by the 80s. Mm-hmm. And they were better positioned to take advantage of the new reality about fuel economy and also emissions, and which was the second fuel crisis, which was in 79. And so this really, the standards to which these cars were built, consumers ultimately were like, oh, this is a better mousetrap. Mm-hmm. Like, as much as I want to buy American, and this started happening obviously in certain parts of the United States sooner than it did in others. Right. But I think it's pretty universal now that even the most blue-blooded of Americans will seriously consider buying a Toyota Tundra or a
which is more
Camry
American than more quote-unquote American than some of the American branded stuff.
Yep, correct. So but that era that's reconciling the American preference for America knows best, and that was becoming an outdated philosophy was, that was perhaps true in 1967, but by 1982, 15 years later, the landscape was very different, and we owe the pervasiveness, the best-selling car in America becoming the Toyota, well, initially the Honda Accord, and then later the Camry, was the result of the Japanese being in a better position to, develop cars that met the needs of consumers during this period.
And regulations, right?
Yes, and the regulatory constraints.
So in the news lately, the reason this came up, obviously, is there's a lot of tumult, if that's the right word, in the in regulations right now concerning cars.
Mm-hmm. We talked about CAFE.
And so what got my attention first was I might have screwed up and not taken.
Oh, can I take this opportunity to gripe about tariffs again also?
Of course.
So
while we're talking about governmental tumultuousness.
Exactly. So, in allegedly April 2nd, the tariff rate was going to go up to 25% supplemental on top of the existing 2.5%. And then they said, oh, actually, never mind. That's not what's going to happen. And then, so we were like, okay, great, everything's fine. I recounted the story of the F40 that we were just, rushing to get in before the deadline. And then we said, okay, everything's going to stay at 2.5%. Great, we'll continue on our merry way and continue to import old cars that are more than 25 years old because the duty rate will be 2.5%. That was a lie. It turns out that they imposed retrospectively, as far as I can tell, but that's maybe not true, reciprocal tariffs depending on the country of origin of the car. So we brought in a car in June and at 2.5%, and then have been hit with a supplemental 12.5% reciprocal tariff in addition to the 2.5% that we already paid.
So 12.5, not 25.
Not 12, because the car's from the EU. So the numbers are based on where the car was manufactured. And so EU is 15%. I think the UK is 12.5%, and it's like 17.5% for Japan or something. There's a different number for every country, which is not what they said was going to be the case. And so a bunch of importers who've brought in various cars are now being hit with, in our case, it's a $65,000 additional bill. On a car that we brought in June, and of course the car's all sold, and that it will completely erase the margin from the car, and that is the point here, and this applies to the emissions and fuel economy also, is that the regulatory environment is extremely unclear. And this extends to obviously outside of cars as well, just to anywhere, is that as long as the regulatory environment is unclear, it's extremely difficult to make business decisions because you don't understand what the constraints are. Businesses can and do adapt, and that's exactly what happened during the Malaise era. But what also happened during the Malaise era was that they were extremely clear about, here's what your regulations are going to be in 1 year's time, 3 years' time, 5 years. Here's your schedule. Here are the penalties that are going to come, and they sort of drew something out and then adhered to it. And the businesses, the car manufacturers responded accordingly and turned out shitboxes until they could figure out how to make cars that were decent that also met the standards. And that's something that we certainly do not have right now, is sort of clarity and like, here's a plan and here's what's going to happen and here's the timeline in which you have to do X, Y, and Z. And so it's extremely difficult to make business decisions. I say this as a business owner who's just importing widgets, but imagine you are designing and building and supply chaining and everything, the development schedule for a product, which is 5-7 years, and the regulatory environment is extremely unclear. And so so the net losers are consumers who don't get products that meet their standards, and or the costs are, then passed on to them because they say, well, we had to do this huge rework at the last minute, and the product now costs this much.
I think the bigger issue is it's not just that it's unclear; it's that it's so volatile.
Yes.
Like, listen, I would happily sit down and have an argument with you, or just not an argument, a discussion with you about any governmental philosophy, right? Do we want to be environmentalists? Do we want to be industrialists?
Yeah. Is there a benefit to having tariffs? Perhaps
100%. We can have all of these things, but I think the one thing that I can't accept is that the government is volatile and also unclear, because none of us can make decisions. And where the automotive industry is concerned, these decisions are the policies and everything are changing on a minute by minute basis. It seems,
and the lead times are 7, 8, 10
years. Right. So what got my attention this this week that made me laugh is that there was how do they fucking phrase it? Basically, the Department of Energy released a guidance. Effectively effectively banning the use of different words. And one of them was emissions.
Because it is considered politicized.
Right. So in addition to emissions, they are not to use. Okay, they issued a statement, a sort of partially retractatory statement, saying that it's not that we're not allowed to use these words, but we're going to encourage really a lot of thoughtfulness and mindfulness around using these words. Climate change, carbon footprint, clean or dirty energy, decarbonization, energy transition, green, sustainability, or tax breaks or credits or subsidies. But the fact that the Department of Energy can't use the word emissions or is cautioned against using the word emissions, and look, they can come out with whatever statement they want and say, we are not, we're not saying you're not allowed to do that, but that is, I'm sorry to say, the same thing that the FCC chair just did to Jimmy Kimmel. I don't know if you know this, right? That was 100% constitutional violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution of this country, period. That was the FCC trying to shut someone up. I think everyone reversing that and taking a step back was the right thing to do. And
due to outspoken consumer response.
I hope so.
From the public.
I mean, listen, if that went, I'm not a lawyer. I have a law degree. That was prima facie violation of the Constitution of this country.
But I also think that the response from the masses was important. I
think it was really important. Yeah.
And if the masses respond, there is still some ability for the individuals to have some impact if enough people feel a certain way and make it known and say, I don't know, cancel their ABC subscriptions. Right. There's some leverage that consumers have. They indicate their preferences through
financial spending.
Yes, their buying decisions, which happens with products of all types all the time. It certainly happened with cars, and that's why we got the sort of influx of higher, better engineered Japanese cars and later on Korean cars in the United States. People voted
with their wallets to buy them over the American stuff, right?
Exactly. And so that is the power of the consumer, certainly, and we all, to some extent, have that power and can wield it if enough of us feel a certain way and the time horizon is long enough, assuming that the regulatory environment is stable enough.
There it is. I mean, that's the thing, is what's going to change next, right? So if you look at the new car industry, oh my God. I mean, it's an about face after a reversal, and
this is what we see about EV mandates, for example. Right.
And it's very difficult to keep track of what the fuck is coming next when the car companies can't figure out what to make next. And so, Porsche got rid of the combustion 718 line, and they're just about to debut the EV, and now they're saying, and we're going to throw combustion engines back in there. And maybe this was all a bit premature. Okay. Was it premature? This is a matter of my opinion. Yeah. So was the catalytic converter. So was the CAFE mandate. So was all the Clean Air Act. That was all premature. That was.
Yes, they said, here are your targets with no clear technology or technological solution to meet it. But that's exactly what engineering is. Engineering is a set of constraints where you say, this is how it has to perform.
Figure it out.
I have no idea what's between now and how it's going to perform, but this is how it has to perform.
And of course the car companies pushed back on all of that back then, and of course they're pushing back on the EV mandate now.
Figuring out what the sausage factory processes look like when they're completely, experimental at that point.
It's expensive. And let's be honest, the one thing that's very clear is the consumer demand for electric vehicles is not yet where it needs to be in order for mass adoption on the scale that the government regs were pushing for, right?
In much the same way you could say that the emissions, a individual consumer is not going to value or understand what the reduction in pollution associated with. If you could say to them, this is how your car is going to perform, this is the fuel economy that it's going to get, which initially in the case of thermal reactors was worse when you were meeting emission standards. And this is what the experience of driving it's going to be like. This is how the MPG it's going to get. This is how it's going to perform in exchange for, fewer emissions. And an individual consumer is going to say, well, fucking, I'd much rather have 400 horsepower and,
Well, yeah, the choice was literally, if they had been given a choice, it would have literally been, okay, here are two identical Chevy Impalas. One costs $5,000. I'm making these numbers up, right? One costs $5,000 and the other one costs $6,000. So it's a big
and one of
price
them
premium.
has 400 horsepower, 300 horsepower, and the other one has 157.
Well, the 300 horsepower one gets 10 miles per gallon. The one that has half the horsepower gets 8. So you're using more fuel. Oh, and the other thing is that the one that's cheaper starts and idles. Oh, and the other one, well, it's going to stall out all the time in traffic. And these are things that are just foreign concepts of most younger people now who've never dealt with carbureted cars. But the cars literally didn't run when they were brand new. They stalled, they backfired, they just would die on you, they would heat soak, they wouldn't restart, they'd have all kinds of issues. And so of course the consumer would say, fuck you, fuck that thing, I'll take the old one, right?
Yep. And what the real answer is that the constraints plus a bunch of engineers and some clever thinking gives you C, neither of those. And instead you get EFI and a car
progress.
that still makes...
But you did get a 10-year misery, right?
Yeah.
So we're...
An era of malaise,
perhaps. It's a very good word. Did you just think of that?
Yeah.
I find it really fascinating. I don't ever like to get political on this podcast, and I don't think it doesn't really matter which side of any argument we're on. I mean, the Kimmel thing, as far as I'm concerned, is there's no sides of this, right? Every side was like, wait a second, this is free speech. We really shouldn't be censoring someone. If you don't want to watch it, you don't have to sponsor it. But I was very happy to see that the conservative side was very much aligned with the liberal side on this one. I don't know if you saw that.
I did.
But yeah, that was great. Like everyone's like, wait a second, hold on. Oops, that's one step too far. But I did compile a list that I now have on my laptop, and I want to pull out of all of the other things that the Trump administration has rolled back in the last, I did send it to myself as a text. That's what I did in the last year. And it's pretty staggering. And it really does explain why the car industry is in complete panic / shambles. So one of the first things that they did was reversing the tailpipe emissions rules that we're going to start in 27. So 27 to 32 model years. We're basically going to force, there's no force here. No one's forcing any technology, but the fuel economy and emissions rules, this is a CO2 rule. So it's effectively a fuel economy rule because CO2 is just proportional to the amount of gas you burn. We're so strict that the only way, given current technologies, for any of these automakers to meet these goals was to hybridize the fleet. Those have been rolled back. So that's just done for light and medium duty vehicles.
So if you were a manufacturer who had planned to debut a car for model year 27 that did that, then the rules that you're playing by have changed.
Have just evaporated. For example, this week we have two big pieces of news in the Miata sphere. One is the passing of Tom Matano, who is the father of the Miata. I wore this shirt as a tribute to him. Matano was here in the studio when we did the Miata Revelations episode. That man was amazing. He was just an absolute light of a human being, and I don't like that he's now gone. The other piece of news is that, as leaked out of Japan, is that the next generation Miata will also be sold as a Toyota GR86, as a 2+2 with a hybrid system in it. Okay, if that's a rumor at this point, no one knows what's going on, but the hybridization is 100% because of CO2 rules, both in the US and the rest of the world, because Europe is very, very strict on CO2. Yeah. Well, all of a sudden, that doesn't matter in the US. So now what the fuck do they do, right? Imagine this. Yes. Imagine you're in the beginning planning phases of the next generation Miata, and you're like, oh, we were going to hybridize it because we had to, but the whole philosophy of Miata is lightweight simplicity. Oh shit, what do we do?
Are we not going to have to do that in the United States? And what about 3 years' time? Is that going to continue to still be the case?
Don't get there yet, because we have bigger conclusions to come to. But you're right. The EV, quote unquote, EV mandate, which was not called EV mandate, was eliminated. And this was another tightening of emission standards to the point where combustion engines, look, worldwide, one way or another, whatever your beliefs are, combustion engines are being outlawed, or were being outlawed, and are now sort of slightly less being outlawed, but they're going away. There's no question. It's just a matter of how we land that plane. The other thing is California's clean air waiver was rescinded or revoked, and that's a little bit frightening. So this is, California got a waiver from the EPA 153,000 years ago.
Probably
I don't remember when it was.
50 or 60 years ago.
I don't remember what it was, but California was given permission to act on its own to invoke stricter emissions limits for vehicles sold in the state.
Yeah, and there's at least a dozen states that subsequently have adopted California standards.
And that is a real burden on the car companies. Let's be honest about that. To make two different versions of a car, to test them both, to make sure they're both. It's stupid. But I understand why California pushed for that, certainly, because remember, California created those standards and then the EPA took them over for the Clean Air Act.
They also invented smog.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't an issue. I mean, if you live in, rural Arkansas, you didn't know you wouldn't have ever seen smog, right? So it would make sense that a place like LA, which was the sort of founder of smog.
Birthplace of smog.
That should be on the sign when you move in. That was important enough for that population to have forced through these emission and control rules. Well, that's now been revoked. So there's one nationwide emission standard. And okay, I get it from a business perspective. I don't understand it from an environmentalist perspective. At the end of the day, like, we all have to live on this planet. And if we were able to meet those needs, and the average cost for car was, don't quote me on this number, it was something trivial. It was $37 or something like that. Just fucking charge people a little bit more money. They're going to vote with their wallets to not, if given the choice, obviously, as we've discussed. But, sorry, I think that, if we can save the planet a little bit for a little bit of money, let's do that. The administration has also suspended the EV charger infrastructure deployment, initiatives. They've now also gotten rid of the penalties for CAFE, and then they're removing EV and credits for like solar and EVs and shit like that. And so what is really happening is the government has come in and say, we are no longer going to force emissions to get better and fuel economy to get better, and we're just going to allow the free market to determine that. And I think that's really short-sighted. I think we wouldn't have the cars that we do today if it weren't for the stress of the Malaise Era, or the malaise of the Malaise Era, let's put it that way. And this is a very different situation, right? There will be some stress and growing pains associated with an electrification process, whether we go full EV or we go hybrid or something else like that. But actually, the technology this time is very different. All of the things that make these engines cleaner are actually making them faster too. And when you have the leaderboard
and
of
reducing complexity,
right? And when you have the leaderboard of the fastest and quickest cars in the world, and they're all electric, well, come on, guys. Like, we're not going to suffer the way we did the last time. Where we're going to suffer is, the grid. Okay, fair point, right? I mean, the grid doesn't need to be
and the experience for the enthusiast,
for sure, right? And that's the big one. But what I worry about is the Malaise Era started the real descent of the American car industry, and we've now killed it off. Actually, I'm going to go one step further and saying, by removing all of these protections, if Europe follows suit, we will have killed off the Western car industry. And what we'll have left is, when these regulations come in, because it's not trying to stop forward progress is very much like trying to dam a river, right? The water is collecting, and at some point the dam is going to breach. And people get so upset when they hear me say this, but if you've lived with an electric car, it is a better transportation device. And I'm not talking about a replacement for a 718 Cayman.
Yes, and it's not for an enthusiast, because what we are forgetting is that the majority of people who consume cars view it like a washing machine. It's a device to get you from here to there. And if it does it cheaper and faster and costs, that's what cheaper is. If it's just a generally more pleasant experience, it's like the same way, we did our stupid shitbox rally with cars from the 70s, and one of the takeaways from that is, I cannot believe that the just vast numbers of consumers were just forced to deal with carburetors and just the dumb bullshit associated with old cars. Nobody wanted,
they were new cars then.
They were new cars,
and they
then.
Still sucked.
Yes. Exactly. But the average consumer had to deal with stuff like that, and they didn't want to deal with that, and they didn't, carburetor icing and chokes and all this dumb stuff that no average consumer wanted to deal with. Because if your washing machine required you to interact with it the way an old car does, then you'd hate it as a
preheated.
Yeah,
warming
and so
up in the morning.
The average consumer will benefit from an electric car, and we are a small but vocal, minority of enthusiasts who actually care about it. And I have said this for, I don't know, probably 15 or 20 years, but I feel that gasoline is far too precious to be wasted on people
Subaru
who aren't
drivers.
enjoying the act of combusting it. It should be used by people who are enjoying it. If you're not enjoying the combustion of gasoline by its own right, then you should drive an EV.
Then you're commuting, right? Then you're using your automobile to automobilize and drive somewhere else.
Or even mobilize.
Mobilize, right? Just to move. And there's a better way, and that's electric, right? And that really pisses off a lot of people, but it really pisses off a lot of people for two reasons.
I think,
number one, they're enthusiasts and they enjoy the burning of combustion, and we're not talking about that. And number two, they don't want the government coming in and telling them what they should and should not be driving. But that's a fallacy. I mean, the government has dictated every part of every car that we touch is subject to a regulation, and cars wouldn't look the way they do, they wouldn't drive the way they do, they wouldn't function the way they do if it weren't for government regulations. And by the way, we wouldn't be here because our parents would all be dead from car accidents because there would be no safety regulation. So while I don't want the government telling me what to do at all,
they already do.
They do. Mm-hmm. And it kind of needs to be, right? Because am I going to vote for my wallet with for some crash protected, numb, e-pass, fucking self-driving, blah, blah, blah. No, I want some 1,800 pound.
That's why we have old cars.
Right. Yeah. You're right. And I can't even bring myself to review new cars anymore. That's really upsetting to me. I'm really struggling with this. I actually suggest.
I don't give a shit.
It's my job.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was on the phone.
It's a crisis of identity for you.
Right. I was on the phone with Anthony Esposito earlier today, and we're putting together a next icon shoot and blah, 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 blah. And we were talking about, I don't know what the fuck it was. And I said, I really should just force myself to sell the e-Golf to force myself to get press cars, because I need to have one sort of modern car that I don't have to worry about warming up and all the other, old car things. And I should just force myself to get rid of that. So I have no choice but to drive press cars again. Because for the last 3 years, I haven't driven press cars. And now I'm like, oh, I haven't driven that. I haven't driven that. I haven't driven that. I haven't driven that. But the truth of the matter is I don't care about any of them, because neither do the people who make them, or neither do the people who engineer them. There's no passion.
Or the people who buy them.
That was harsh.
It's true.
It's also true. Yeah. It's just a bad
There's
time.
a small number of enthusiasts out there looking for some bright light, but the majority of people are like, I prefer this because it's not walking.
Yeah. No, and most cars are just that. It's a really terrible situation. But what I really fear that's happening is the progress will continue. The world will continue to move towards the electrification of the automobile for all of the aforementioned reasons. And if we don't have regulations in place that force the hand of the car companies that we are currently interacting with, they're going to get left behind. And when the dust settles, the US car industry will be gone, the European car industry will be gone, and we will be left with no choice other than Chinese innovation, which is, we don't have any Chinese cars in the market in the US now. Wow. I mean, all it takes is 2 seconds of sort of searching for reviews of everything that's happening right now in China, and it's unbelievable. It's all electric, and it's unbelievable. And that, I worry that we're saying, give the consumers choices. Don't have big government. And had we not done what we did in the Malaise era, we wouldn't be where we are, and we're now finishing off the conventional car industry. So the Malaise era was good.
Remind me how again?
Because that wouldn't be there. I
Okay.
wish your 129 is parked outside.
Yeah.
Your 124 is parked outside.
True.
That car wouldn't exist either. My 201 wouldn't exist. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at the cars that existed before.
The GT3 wouldn't be what it is. There's, if you wanted to choose a more conventionally desirable car, if you could possibly imagine something more desirable than a Sako era Mercedes.
A 911 GT3 would be better without today's drive-by noise standards. It would have short gearing and fuel economy standards.
Yes.
So that for sure it's hurting us, right? I mean, as enthusiasts, but
the car's ability to rev to 9,000 RPM and to have the compression ratio that it does and to have direct injection and all this stuff is all the result of the Malaise era. That's the point I was trying to make. That the good things that engine can do are the result of the technological advances that were required, that were forced, that were obligated by the Malaise era.
Yes, I will say direct injection was the grandchild of that, right?
Yes. But that sort of continued pressure.
Exactly.
Towards, what is the benefit of direct injection? Let's go to school here. Why is direct injection good?
It's an efficiency gain. That's it. So without turbocharging, all it is an efficiency gain, because it allows you to have a higher compression ratio, which therefore allows you to have a higher expansion ratio, which allows you to make more power from less
the
fuel.
Same displacement also.
Yeah.
those are directly related, obviously.
Yeah. And then you add turbocharging on it, and now you have the same.
It allows higher compression and the controlling over your ignition timing and the timing of the fueling,
which are much better emissions. There are benefits across the board that have allowed us to have today's modern turbocharged 1,000 horsepower monsters. They wouldn't be possible without DI, which would have not happened if it were not for the continued pressure of ever increasing emission standards on stuff.
Or decreasing.
Okay. Yes, exactly.
The standards are going up, but emissions are going up.
The amount of emissions, and I know that's now a bad word that the Department of Energy is, and say that come out of cars is like laughably small. Like you could.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the goal, or maybe the philosophy that underpins these rollbacks, is that we've done enough. It's good enough. We solved the problem, right? See, the ozone hole is closed, so we call that good, and now do something else.
And okay, for the record, were it not for CO2 emissions, another word I'm not allowed to say, or a word again I'm not allowed to say, maybe that is true, right? I mean, the current crop of cars are ZEVs and PZEVs. So, so there's a zero emissions vehicle mandate. That was a California thing that X percent of cars sold in California had to be ZEVs, zero emissions vehicles. And the combustion cars got so close that they were called PZEVs, partial zero emissions vehicles. And it's not because it was a part of an EV, like it wasn't the front bumper. It was because the emissions levels were so low, they were barely measurable. And at that point, they were giving them partial credit and saying, okay, I know the car does emit, but it emits so little that it's fucking negligent. What that
negligible.
Was negligible. Yeah, sorry. It wasn't factoring CO2. And CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and that's causing the warming of the planet Earth. And whether you blame the car or not, the planet is warming up. We've looked at that. We don't know exactly what the cause is, but we have a pretty good idea. And that idea is that that's probably CO2. And so maybe we should curb the consumption of CO2. And also, let's use our eyes and logic and say, well, gasoline is a finite resource. Some point it's going to run out. So if we can transition to something that doesn't emit CO2 and doesn't burn this finite resource, well, why wouldn't we?
Especially if the cars are quicker and less complex.
Quieter and less complex and less maintenance intensive.
And more ideally suited to the average indiscriminate, non-enthusiast car consumer's needs.
So key takeaway, leave the gas for us.
Yes.
I enjoy the process of lighting dead dinosaurs on fire. Yep. I do.
Yep.
And I don't take it for granted. When I start a car, because my daily is an EV, so I'm one of those assholes, right? When I start a car, it's exciting. It's a difference. It's something to celebrate, and it's something to enjoy. And I enjoy the music, and I enjoy the revs, and I enjoy the vibrations, and I enjoy that whole dance of driving a manual. And I don't want that to go away. But I think it needs to for the vast majority of transportation in order for us to have the ability to do that.
Well, and I think the regulations that we talked about before, like drive-by noise regulations and such, are sort of systematically eliminating the joy anyway. So it's like when you have perverted the original experience of motoring joy so much that it is basically all but outlawed, then it's like a shadow of the former joy that a true great car experience should be. Then at some point you just take the horse out back and shoot it.
So I recently rented a car. I rented a Renault Twingo. But it's now, Twingo's dead. So this was the last generation Twingo.
The end of an era.
I have much to say about this, but mostly we are spoiled fucking rotten in this country. This was a 69 horsepower 3-cylinder. I've never felt any vibrations like this. The whole car was basically rattling itself apart. This is a
Stellantis product.
It was so fucking awful. I mean, it was beyond awful. Like the clutch was terrible. The shifter was terrible. The steering was wretched beyond belief. It rode like an ox cart. It was cute. I'll give it that. It was very pretty. I took some pretty pictures on the water. I was in Greece. And like, it's very cute. And then you get in and you're like, the thing is fucking ruined. But what I realized was it's either below 2000 RPM and literally shaking the entire car to the point where it's structurally compromised as far as I'm concerned. Like shit was moving that shouldn't have been moving. Or it's completely silent. And we are now at a point where you can engineer these combustion engines to be within a narrow window to be silent. and then you have to add an active sound. And this car had no active sound, so what I can tell. And the whole experience was so miserable that I kept thinking, if this were even a 40 horsepower electric car with 10 miles of range, it would have just been a better experience. Every car on sale today has active sound happening. I can't think of a single one that doesn't. If you've gotten to the point where you have to add the sound back in, fail the brief. Sorry, like you fucked up.
Take the horse out back and shoot it.
Shoot it and just move on to what's next. And I think our government's going the opposite direction, and I'm a little bit scared.
Well, good times.
Here.
What a great time to be an enthusiast, and Carmudgeonation has been provided in this episode.
Yeah, I guess we are on brand, aren't we?
In abundance.
This was a fully Carmudgeonated episode, wasn't it?
Yes. No partial Carmudgeonation.
We liked carburetors, and we liked cars that stalled out at red lights, and
or similar.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
yeah.
Maybe this was the last episode of the Carmudgeon Show. We'll see.
No. Next week, we got to talk about this shitbox rally that you did.
Oh, you don't think this is going to get us canceled? I think we're going to get some hate mail.
Oh, we're going to get some hate mail. But I try to be objective. I'm trying not to have most people not come away from this saying, well, they presented both sides. But I think where the car industry is concerned, it's without, how could you see it any differently? It's short-term gain for long-term hurt. And I don't think
instant gratification. It is the word of the day, or the philosophy of the year or decade.
Sure. I like to be gratified instantly.
Well,
I would like some dark chocolate right here. It didn't happen.
That was how we ended this episode of the Carmudgeon Show.
Next week, where Derek talks about the miseries of carbureted Malaise Era shitboxes, because he did a shitbox rally.
And a non-shitbox rally.
Oh, and a very non-shitbox. But those are carbureted shitboxes too.
Yes.
Just really expensive carbureted
Expensive, but still shitty.
Yeah, fabulous.
My specialty. All right. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.